Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and I'm excited to tell you about a new film that just hit theaters this weekend that I'm sure a lot of people have been highly anticipating since its announcement, and that is Wonka, the newest film directed by Paul King. And I say Paul King's name with this sense of majesty and aura around it because, as most of you know, if you've watched this channel for enough time now, you know I love Paddington. You know I love the Paddington films. I have my little Paddington right here behind me. I'm obsessed with the Paddington films, specifically Paddington 2. It really is one of, I think, the greatest films of the last 10 years. And I'm not saying that jokingly or ironically. I legitimately love it with all my heart.
Paddington 2 is incredible.
Paul King kind of introduced me to one of my favorite characters in one of my favorite franchises. So I was really excited to see him helm this prequel to Gene Wilder's Wonka because that was also something that was made a note of in the marketing and in the lead up to the film, and the fact that this was a direct prequel to the Willy Wonka we know from the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This guy right here, Mr. Gene Wilder. Before I get into my actual thoughts about Wonka, I did just want to say it is the holiday season, and I'm not just talking about Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and New Year's. I am also talking about Taylor Swift's birthday, and a few days ago, Chadwick Webb, his wife Carrie Webb, and my co-host for Marvelous Movie Mondays, Kelsey Kilpatrick, all got on a stream and basically narrowed 128 of Taylor Swift songs down to one single song as the greatest Taylor Swift song of all time bracket. So go check that video out. It was a lot of fun. It was a live stream. It went almost 5 hours. You can just put it at 2 times speed and it'll only be 2 hours long. But I had a lot of fun doing that video. So if you are a Taylor Swift fan, if you're a Swiftie, go check out that video because it was a lot of fun to do. Back to Wonka, and I bring up music with Taylor Swift because first and foremost, this is a musical, and this is something that I don't think the trailers necessarily gave away too much. Obviously, we heard like little bits and pieces of pure imagination in the trailers, but when you watch this film, this is not just occasionally Willy Wonka will sing a little ditty. No, this is a full-fledged musical. There are dance numbers, there are elaborate dance numbers, very big production number songs, and I think it's very interesting to judge Wonka as a musical because I've seen so many musicals now. I was born and raised on musicals. I love musicals to where I can say the actual production of the musical numbers is so amazing because Paul King just has this knack for a visual, colorful flair. We see it in the Paddington movies. In Paddington 2, there's an amazing musical number starring Hugh Grant, who's also in this film. But I think the problem with the music in this film is the music itself. I didn't find any of the songs to be particularly catchy. Yes, they have cute little melodies to them, but none of them felt like they were going to be iconic movie musical songs the way some of the songs in the original film did, like I've Got a Golden Ticket or Pure Imagination, which I mentioned. And they sing Pure Imagination at the end of this film, and that was by far the most powerful and most intriguing musical number. And I just wish that some of the other musical numbers kind of were on the level musically as Pure Imagination, because I think what Paul King is doing with those songs is so magical. But if the songs themselves aren't as interesting, then it does kind of bog down some of the film here. This movie doesn't explore Willy becoming Wonka, contrary to what the actual tagline for the movie is. From the very first scene, he is Willy Wonka. He's got the top hat. He can do magical things with his top hat. He's got the long velvet jacket. This is not a journey of Willy Wonka becoming this chocolatier. He's already a chocolatier at the beginning of this movie. This is just about him trying to kind of get his name out there and kind of take down these other chocolate businesses and find his place in the chocolate industry, which I thought was an interesting choice. I think some people may have wanted to see the kind of growth arc of Willy Wonka, the kid, into Willy Wonka, the chocolatier. But I like how this was just kind of this middle chapter that maybe wouldn't get focused on in other movies, of how we get from, okay, he's an amazing chocolatier, to, okay, here he is with his own factory and here he has his golden ticket thing with all the 5 kids. It's kind of that middle bridge of him trying to get the notoriety in the town he lives in and trying to make a name for himself. They do bring in hints of his backstory. His mother is played by the amazing Sally Hawkins from The Shape of Water and from the Paddington films. And one thing I have to say with Paul King, as I said earlier, the visual flair for these musical numbers is really exceptional, even though I didn't like the music itself. And I think Paul King is just such a fascinating director that even when it's not musical, there's still so much going on with the color, with the design, with the way there are so many innovative creative animation sometimes incorporated, sometimes these big whimsical sets and the building of the sets in real time. It kind of has that effect of the scene in Paddington 2 when the prison is literally becoming this like colorful flower laden prison, spectacular thing before our eyes. There's kind of some of that device in this film too, where things will literally just kind of flourish in front of our eyes and go from like this gray kind of stale color muted color scheme into something more whimsical and fun. And I think that's where Wonka shines the most, is in the visuals, in the design, because as I said, the story is pretty base level, is pretty cute, and you can kind of see where the story is going. The story doesn't take any unpredictable routes, so you really have to deliver with the filmmaking, and I think Paul King really does. I think that is the biggest strength of Wonka, is the filmmaking, and I really do want to see Paul King take on another musical, because I think he shows here that he can clearly direct the hell out of a musical number. It's just I wish the music given to him was stronger, and I think if he were to take maybe a musical that already exists that hasn't been adapted to film, or an original film musical but with someone who writes songs that are even better than these, I think it could be a really interesting combination. I would love to see him, kind of flourish even more as a musical director. Another talking point that I think is important when it comes to Wonka is Wonka himself.
My name is Willy Wonka.
And I think Timothée Chalamet does a great performance for what he's given, what he's written. I mean, Paul King, he's a Paddington director, so obviously his messaging is very positive, very sweet, very humble. And that is not necessarily the character we know Willy Wonka to be. If you've watched the Gene Wilder one, even the Johnny Depp one, Willy Wonka's kind of a cynical bastard at times.
Don't just stand there, do something!
Help. Police. Murder.
He's kind of got an edge to him, a darkness to him. I mean, there's that scene where they're on the boat in the original film, there's no knowing where we're going, like that kind of freaky, kind of creepy aesthetic and stuff that I think when you're trying to make Willy Wonka in this film such a wholesome, positive, charismatic guy. Yes, Gene Wilder was charismatic. Yes, he had some kindness to him. He was ultimately a nice guy by the end of it. But there was that darkness and edge that I don't think Timothée Chalamet's Wonka has, but I don't think it's Timothée Chalamet's fault. And I don't even think it's Paul King's fault. I think it's just the general concept of this film is that they wanted to go with a different version of the character. The problem is when you have pure imagination in the film, when you quite literally try to make it tie into the original, there's an expectation set for the audience. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. If you were to watch this right from this movie right into the Gene Wilder one, I think there's a very big leap in character of that Willy and this Willy. But I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing if you take this film as its own film. As its own film, it's a really sweet character and a really sweet film. There's great relationships with all the characters in this film. I liked all the characters in this film. Paul King, another strength he has that he also has in the Paddington films, is all these little side characters and bit characters. And a lot of the characters in this film are played by actors we see in the Paddington films. Simon Farnaby himself, one of the co-writers on Paddington and in this film, he has one of the highlight roles in the Paddington films. And in this film, he also has some great bits. He kind of plays the watchman at this zoo, and he gets tricked by Willy Wonka and some of his peers into taking this candy, which essentially makes him drunk and passes out. And he has just so many great moments. I mean, there's a lot of actors in this thing that you can be like, oh, I remember them from the Paddington films, and they are all really great. And I think it's because Paul King has a very unique style of comedy as well that these actors are very experienced with, and I think that helps a lot.
Good night, sir. I am going flat.
Some new additions to the crew. I mean, obviously Timothée Chalamet, who's doing a pretty good job here. We also have Olivia Colman, who I think is the standout of the film. She kind of plays the Madame Thénardier from Les Mis, if you will. She's just completely vile and nasty and very abrasive, and it works totally well in this film.
Prepare to be amazed.
Tape up.
Because as if the audience didn't love Timothée Chalamet enough, you need to give Wonka this kind of adversity to kind of overcome, this obstacle to kind of hurdle. And Olivia Colman is a great villain. It feels like the classic Roald Dahl villains, like the Trunchbull from Matilda. And I think that's what Paul King gets so well, is that kind of style of comedy that Roald Dahl has. Now, there's one bit of comedy that I didn't like, and it's something that's been spoken about so much on the Twitter sphere, X sphere, whatever you want to call it, that I'm not going to harp on too much, but it is one joke that I think is just so early 2000s that I'm like, why include this in a 2023 film? And it's centered around Keegan Michael Key's character, who indulges in chocolate throughout the film, and as the film goes on, he gets progressively fatter and fatter to the point where the movie kind of makes a laughing stock out of him. And I get it, he's one of our villains, so yeah, to make the villain look foolish, that's a common trope. You got to make the villain look dumb at the end if you want the audience to be like, haha, you lose, villain. But to do it at the expense of someone's weight in a world where body positivity is becoming such a big thing, it just didn't necessarily need to be the choice they made. I mean, there's a scene where Willy Wonka quite literally gives everyone colorful hair, or he makes them fly into the stratosphere. Why couldn't they do that? Why couldn't Willy Wonka just give him a really embarrassing mustache, or maybe give him a really big feet or something? I just wish there was something else opposed to, oh, this character became fat and now we're going to make a bunch of jokes about how fat he is. It's just something I don't like to see personally in 2023 films, and especially in a film like this that is preaching positivity. If this was the Gene Wilder cynical Willy Wonka and there were kind of these crass humorous jokes, I'd be a little more okay with it. I probably still wouldn't love it, but at least I'd be like, okay, that fits in the style of the film. But when this film is kind of the total opposite and is so positive and uplifting, it's the same guy who made the Paddington movies, it's got this overall air and sense of kindness and warmth. That joke just didn't feel like it belonged in this film, and it just kind of put me off of this film at times. But every time the film would lose me with some of its music or some of its offensive humor, I did find overall the grand story and some of the themes to be really charming, and it did kind of reel me in at times when I was falling out of it. Now, I don't think this is on the level of the original, but I think this is at least on par, if not better, than the Tim Burton version, which is a version I grew up with as a kid as well. So, I have a little bit more fondness for it than other people do. I really like the Oompa Loompa edition in this. It is Hugh Grant, as you've seen from the trailer.
Oompa Loompa Doompa Diddy, I'm not in premium economy.
He's very funny. I almost wish they had introduced the Oompa Loompas a little earlier in the film, because it's kind of mentioned early in the film. It's like, oh yeah, this little man steals my candy. And then later on in the film, we finally see him, and then he goes away for a while, and then he comes back again, and then he's finally in it a lot in the third act. I almost kind of wish there was a little bit more of the Oompa Loompa stuff going on throughout the film, just because it was some of the funniest stuff in the film.
Funny little man. How dare you? I will have you know that I am a perfectly respectable size for an Oompa Loompa.
But I think for the amount and the abundance of characters in this thing, it is really well balanced. I feel like a lot of these characters feel like they have well fleshed out personalities, a lot of great humor. Even our villains, we have 3 central villains, plus our Keegan Michael Key character, plus our Olivia Colman character, and I think all of them are fleshed out fairly well, or at least have distinct enough qualities that kind of separate them from one another. They don't just all feel generic by any means. And I think Willy Wonka is not lost in all of this, because he is still a central presence, despite not being necessarily the same Willy Wonka that we might have been used to with Gene Wilder, despite the film also wanting to be that version of Willy Wonka at the same time. So it's a little disjointed in that way, but it's Paul King. So like I said, no matter what happens, it's all going to look fantastic. And like I said, I want Paul King to direct a full-fledged musical with some real amazing talent, maybe like an Alan Menken, even a Lin-Manuel Miranda. Just give someone who has been at the peak of their game when it comes to lyricism and music. And I really think Paul King still has a great career ahead of him. Yes, we lost him for Paddington in Peru, and I'm still a little hesitant if that movie is going to have the same charm as the first 2, but I'm very excited still to see anything Paul King does next. So Wonka is not a resounding recommendation from me, but it is a pleasant one, and I do still think people should go see it, especially around the holidays. It's a good holiday film to bring your kids to bring your parents to, because there is some of that nostalgia tied into the original for the people who've grown up with it. The only people I'd say to stay away from it are people who are afraid of giraffes, and before you laugh at that, I did have a friend in college who was afraid of giraffes, so I just wanted to make sure that disclaimer was out there. If you are easily scared of giraffes, there is a very big giraffe presence in this film, so just be warned. So that's my review for Wonka. As I said, there's a Taylor Swift bracket that we did a few days ago out there for you to check out. In a few days, we're going to have our season finale of Marvelous Movie Mondays, ending in a pretty big double-header trivia match as we continue our Multiverse of Madness tournament. And we still got some videos coming for you by the end of the year, a little holiday treat, if you will. I'm going to be kind of throwing out a few more reviews as the year comes to an end. Otherwise, that is all I have for today. Thank you so much to these folks who helped donate as part of our subathon almost a year ago. There is another subathon on the horizon. More information will be shared about that later. But thank you for watching this review, and I will see you next time.